Good morning, folks. It's the morning after the Buccaneers have made it to the Super Bowl. So I got a different routine today, but a real pleasure to have Jason Prater and Marty Black. I've dealt with them in years at Plex Software before this. They're doing a startup and looking forward to hearing from them about that. Thank you, Jason and Marty. It's yours.
Thanks, Vinnie. Thanks, Vinnie. It's really a pleasure to talk to you, continue to talk to you, and share what we've been working on at Cella. So I want to start with a little bit about us, just to catch everybody up to speed on where we've been up to. First and foremost, we focus on delivering cloud solutions to the manufacturing industry that connect supply chain to manufacturing operations. And really that's got a basis in our deep roots in the automotive supply chain. Like I grew up from my dad owned a small tier one, and so I grew up running actually a mill, a press, and a forklift when I was much too young to do that stuff. But we've actually kind of have a really diverse customer base. These things we've seen in the automotive supply chain actually really apply across a lot of manufacturing. And for us, when we think about this grand scope, we really want to focus on one thing, and that's like material handler roles. And that's if you think about forklift driver or material handler or docker worker, anyone who moves things around and kind of help them there. We'll focus on their day-to-day experience, but also give the analytics to their supervisors and managers to kind of manage through it. And so when we look at this greater, what manufacturers are doing, you see this huge investment as they enter Industry 4.0. You see manufacturers investing in cloud ERP, CRM, supply chain, and really IoT. And I think IoT has been the one where I think it shows manufacturers long history of investment. Like they continue to kind of find and look for ways to leverage and gain data as to what's happening. And you see that whether it be small manufacturers to very large ones. And these technologies, a lot of them help them kind of lower the threshold of what it takes to be a global supplier or a global supply chain. It used to be only the billion-dollar guys were multinationals with global operations, but now you see that footprint is in the $50 million range for a manufacturer have operations in Eastern Europe and in Mexico and in Asia, specifically China. And they've leveraged these technology investments to kind of manage this global supply chain. And that's a combination of, build best in class and build close to where you want to sell it. And you're going to continue to see that. And I think no matter what, you can't put that genie back in the bottle on that one. And despite all this great investment, and despite all this great process change, what manufacturers still struggle with is this last 200 yards of moving parts inside a facility. So you've got parts coming from your Chinese supplier, you got parts coming in from your sister division in Krakow, and you can't get them to the line. And in fact, when we talk to our customers, but also companies in the field, in fact, an OEM reached out to me, one of the automotive ones, and they're like, the biggest struggle we have is getting, it's not scrap, it's not efficiency, it's getting parts to the line, right? And so when they have this struggle, everything just grinds to a halt, right? And so you have this beautiful equipment that grinds to a halt because you don't have the right at the right time. You got time and money wasted, because or they don't really understand it, right? It's created this black hole of what the material handling process is. And it's compounded by this problem of labor shortage. And this was a problem, in McKinsey and Plant Moran and even Plex in their manufacturing survey, they kind of related is that before COVID, the greatest problem for manufacturers was labor shortages, right? And COVID's just amplified that. And then when you look at material handling specifically, it's a narrow profile. It's highly safety, but you want someone fast but not reckless, and that's a very tight thing to hire. And you got other people coming into the market to take that skill set. And we always think of one of our customers in Central Ohio. Amazon decided to build a distribution center across the street and wiped out their team, right? And it's just changed the economics of the business because Amazon just will afford to and can afford to just pay beyond what manufacturing is used to.
And when I was working with Jason at a previous company, Plex, we would take these tours together. Vinnie, you were on the shop floor with us, and you'd be able to see all these incredible processes. And sort of when Jason started talking to me about this idea of us starting a company, starting Cella, he took me to a customer, and he's like, "Do you notice anything?" And I'd see some machines running just fine, fully staffed, and I'd see some machines just not running. And he's like, the reason that's not running isn't because they don't have the parts in the building. It isn't because the machine doesn't have the right tooling. It's not because they don't have an operator run it. It's because that guy over there is just waiting for a forklift to drive by so he can flag him down like a taxi and ask for parts. And even when he's asking for parts, that doesn't mean the machine gets to fire right back up. That material handler then has to go drive around the building, hopefully find the right parts in the right location, because manufacturers are fantastic on their location control and inventory control and warehouses, have we seen. But it's about how we can find that, and really our thesis as an organization and as a company is how can we empower these material handlers to drive down this downtime waiting for parts.
Well, that's pretty incisive that you noticed that. Jason, I've heard you say that the cost of waiting around is even greater than scrap in some manufacturers?
It's not some, it's in most manufacturers. And you actually see that in one of our customer case studies, where it's multitudes higher. And I think it's where you've seen this investment in quality systems and quality processes, and combined with IoT, they've kind of really dialed in. Their scrap is pretty low actually today compared to historical standards. But when you look at what they've invested in material handling, the last great innovation to kind of help them is a radio, and that was in the 80s. They've really not kind of had the opportunity to make an investment to really look at the efficiency and what's going on in that process, to say what's going on, how am I deploying my resources. And Marty and I we have a customer, like our big question we often ask is, how do you know how many material handlers to have and how to deploy them? And his answer was like, I fire one and see if downtime goes up or down. And we're like, okay, what if you make a mistake? He's like, well, I have to try and find somebody else to replace them. And it's like, that's so archaic. It's this great gap between that supply chain and that MES.
Vinnie, I'm sure there's a time where you've walked a shop floor and you've seen incredible robotics, you've seen machine automation and PLCs and ERP and the WMS working seamlessly to keep this orchestration. Yet there's a loudspeaker saying that cell 3 needs parts. We're just trying to find a way to bridge that gap and give material handlers the tools that they need to be as successful as everyone else, and the insight to take credit for when they do something well, or be able to have the conversation if there's opportunity to improve their team. Because as of right now, majority organizations, that the last innovation that they've had is the radio. Yeah. What defines a good material handler? Someone who looks busy, right? And, right. and we need to find a better way than just someone who looks busy.
So
we're able to.
Is your ideal user profile material handler or forklift operator? What would you say is your?
So we focus on forklift drivers just because that's what we see the most of, but honestly, we expand to anywhere who's touching and moving material. And so whether that be by forklift, by tugger, by cart, water spudders.
Receiving also, or?
Receiving. We've even, and in the shipping dock as well, as people need parts brought over to that line. Okay. I use the forklift because that's what I grew up on. I actually own a forklift. I own a 1978 Yale. And so it's the easiest that everyone kind of identifies with, but it's really just people who do things in motion.
People brag about their hot rod car.
I have a high-low.
That's how you know it's meant to be.
That's how you know it's meant to be. Is I actually owned the forklift before I created Cella, but it is one of my favorite pieces of equipment. And so I think that brings it to like really what we focus on, right? And that's connecting MES to the supply chain. And the first and most important piece to us is communication. And we focus on that because it's so archaic, but it's so important. If I, a material handler, don't know what to do, I got to wait for someone to flag me down. I got to wait for some loud hailer or some other method. It's just it's the 21st century, for crying out loud, right? And so we want to enable that, and we focus that. And so you'll see this whole process of the operators communicating to the material handlers communicating to each other, all digitally, so that we can gather the data and track the analytics and kind of give you a more insightful picture of what the team is doing. And so that starts with the first layer. Then that moves on to what do you think of? I think of communication really between machines and material handlers. As you see these continued investments of IoT equipped operations where they're able to tell and slow down and speed up the manufacturing process based on real-time analytics of what the machine's doing. We want to extend that and leverage that out to how the parts, empty scrap, whatever that may be. It moves on to industrial mobile applications. Like my whole process is the fact that we focus on people who move, and therefore you need mobile applications to support them. And that's not only just to communicate, but also to enable them to do things like, where's the inventory at? What's the most efficient process to go to? Who is taking care of that request? How do I communicate back to them if there's a problem? You need something that fits in an industrial environment. And that just means like people can use it with their gloves on, that people can see things easily and quickly.
Or the right tones. Manufacturing
or the right tones.
Is not a quiet business. So what can we do to make sure that these operators to increase safety? As we mentioned before, these forklift operators, if you go through the data on the amount of accidents that they have for forklifts in the manufacturing environment, it's incredible. And it's something that we feel like we can make an impact and reduce if, instead of having these forklift drivers looking left and right and just trying to find work, visually driving around, let's have a safe place for them to park. Let's have a mobile application that they can get their queue of work from and safely do their business, versus having to drive around like a taxi looking for stuff to do, because you're only asking for accidents if a forklift is driving when it doesn't need to.
Exactly. And you gather that and you get this data analytics. And so I've become a data junkie. I think that's one of the reasons why I actually got into this field. And we now can collect massive amounts of data, so much so that it's actually hard. It's almost useless unless you can really narrow it down to give visibility to the supervisor initially, to say, this is what's going on within the black hole of your process. Here's who's doing what. Here's how efficient they are. Here's how that work's being reported up. And here's how they're responding to it. So you can make real-time decisions, and then funnel that up again to the more macro level at the manager level, to say, here are the investments you've made. Here's how that's happening. Here's the process changes that you can test and try out and compare and say, hey, when we changed our manufacturing process, when we changed our materials process, here's the impact on downtime, on efficiency, on reporting incidents in terms of ability to respond. And so we take this, and for us, we kind of narrow this into, how does this actually work? Like, what's the brass tacks of how this happens? And so the first thing we use is our Cella request management. And it really consists of two pieces. One is for operators at a line to say, I need something. And one is the mobile app that the material handlers. And so today, Vinnie, you are our operator. Thank you so much for making a wonderful product. And let's say you need some empty boxes because you're running really well, and you need parts or empties to go to. You enter a request that pages out to all your material handling support. So Marty and I will be your material handlers today. But me being the faster one, notice that you need something. I'll say, I got it. And so I'll hit take request. That communicates back to you that Jason's going to take care of you today, Vinnie. Drops off Marty's screen so he can go focus on the next operator and continue going. And so you have this dialogue back and forth by simply pressing a simple button back and forth. And so that everyone understands, you're not shouting into the void. I'm not driving around pointlessly looking for work. It's much more focused and directed. A lot of people a lot of our customers equate it to, it's like ride sharing for forklifts, right? That one person makes a request, the whole app takes over to figure out what's the most ideal person to take care of it. And there's some back and forth to figure that out before a driver takes that over.
And also what this drives is an understanding of how long things are taking. Once they click accept, the counter starts in the background. Okay, on average, how long is it taking a material handler to respond? How long is it taking for delivering parts? To go back to the ride sharing example, you don't call for your Uber when you're off your flight, standing in the cold parking lot in a Michigan winter, and then wait your 20 minutes for a ride. The second the plane lands and you're able to turn your plane off airplane mode, you order your Uber and time it up. So the second you exit the door is the second that the Uber arrives and you're able to leave without standing in the cold. That's what we're trying to drive these organizations to be able to enable communication and tools like this, but also the understanding is saying, don't call for parts when you run out of parts. That's not preventing the downtime. Look, see that it's taking on average 5 minutes. You know your cycle times for your machines, and we'll get into a second an even smarter layer of that. But we have this understanding of how long things are taking, how long things are going to take. Let's get ahead of that So, but by the time the last piece comes off the line, if you need raw material, your forklift operator's driving up to be able to drop those off and ready to go and produce more parts. So you don't have that silence. The last thing that manufacturers want to hear, especially in the metal stamping industry where we have a lot of our customers, is silence on the shop floor.
And I presume, I mean, you guys are still a startup, but you've been able to show minutes of savings, several minutes of savings.
It's actually, I've seen some of the stuff. Well, we have customer examples later, but the two big things that we see is one, the just sheer lack of understanding of how long customers truly believe that their material handlers are taking. They'll say 5 to 10 minutes, and we have to then preemptively say, like, when you turn this on, you're going to see a number that's going to shock you. But we're going to be able to fine tune what's your model like for how your material handlers or forklift drivers serve the lines. Are you in an ambulance model where everybody serves everything? Or are we going to be able to determine those fast movers versus slow movers to organize the teams? Being able to gain that insight, and Jason will be able to go into that in a little bit.
Yeah. And I think that leads like naturally to our next iteration, which is essentially great. Vinnie is able to manually create a request, but you know what? I've made an IoT investment in my equipment. The machine can actually detect this, and that's where we see more and more. And so we have a full API layer we've exposed for our customers, where they can add and cancel and manage requests automatically. And we'll see the implementation in a customer success story a little bit later. It's really around manufacturers who have the process understanding to say, "Hey, I'm running fast than I usually do. I'm going to request more support right when I need it." And I'm calculating out the cycle time so that as that last part comes off the machine, the high-low shows up, picks up that basket of parts, and drops off a new empty for me at the same time. That's the kind of granularity we can kind of offer those customers, and that you'll see exploited. And finally, now we got the material handler down, so he knows what to do. He knows who he's servicing. The operators understand what's going on. That piece up now is that supervisor. Where is my work coming from? Where's my team being deployed to? What is the average response time? And this is a critical one because that tells you how much earlier you need to go in order to kind of fulfill that request to keep that machine running. And so this whole process kind of goes through, and you iterate through with customers as we go through that experience from a supervisor level of, it's no longer the nice guy, right? Who's your best material handler? It's who's handling the most requests. How far are they driving, and what's their idle time? We can now give those analytics. And so we've run into customers where sometimes somebody was not viewed highly because they were a bit brash to deal with, a little bit brash. But come to find out, they are a material handler that's twice as good as anybody else, because now you have data to compare them. The next request out of that is, I want to see what we kind of driven to is the downtime and what actually happens. So we've actually done this with one of our customers, is that we can actually see the downtime metrics or downtime events and see what's happening, the timeline of events. So we see from the MES that, hey, the operator took machine down. We see at the same time, he said he called for parts. He got the parts 4 minutes later, but did not bring the machine up for 16 minutes past that. So he was down for 20 minutes when he should have been down for 0, because he knows how fast the team's responding to him. He should have put the request in at 4 or 5 minutes ahead of time, and he would be able to keep that machine going. That's the kind of visibility that we kind of give, and that's the kind of visibility we want to focus on, because to us, that 20 minutes, you can't get back, right? Time is...
Did he take a bathroom break or a cigarette break?
We call it the high-low break, right? I called for a high-low, and I just...
It's the material handler's fault. It's the forklift driving team fault, and we want to be able to reward them for their talent and how hard they work. On the other side of that, we have organizations that have this monitor up on a big screen in the warehouse, where a lot of the material handlers are now sort of in a staging position, waiting for their cue. And they realized after increasing their communication, the biggest issue they were facing is that they had really sort of a misorganized in terms of a layout of their facility. So they had way too many material handlers just being hindered by the lack of communication. The second they were able to enable communication using Cella request management, they realized we have too many high-low drivers. They were able to take one off, put them to cycle counting, right? Making sure they have an accurate inventory every single day of the year versus just their annual physical inventory. And then they put a threshold to say, if you see this average response time get up over 17 minutes, we need you to get back on the forklift and be able to create requests and drive those down. So it's about how can we take and fine tune these material handling teams now that you have data to go off of, now you have analytics to go off of, versus, oh, he's down because his radio battery went out or the forklift ran out of propane. These are problems that should have been solved a long time ago, but we're proud to be able to bring these to market and be able to serve our customers like Jason will talk about here in a sec.
And we always like to talk about customers. I could literally talk about customers all day long. And honestly, this is the best part of the business. And so I'm going to give a couple examples of some of our customers. And so the first one is a global tier 1 automotive supplier with a huge focus on M&A. And their whole process is they have really become experts in their field at a specific manufacturing process. And so they go acquire businesses who kind of need that expertise where they can leverage that and expand it. They're $500 million in revenue, and they have an enormous SKU list. They make parts as small as a tiny bracket that fits in your hand to giant floor pan, body panels, parts that literally are instrumental to the entire vehicle. When we started with them, the big focus for them to start was on increasing communication. They had a ton of high-lows and forklift drivers throughout the facility working with an ambulance model, but they were getting a lot of downtime. People didn't feel like they got taken care of, especially some of their, based on the layout of the facilities, people in the corners were like, I never see a forklift. And so they had this struggle of downtime, but then they had the struggle of like, which is my good material handlers, which ones are my bad ones, right? Which ones do I need to coach up? And there's this vast amount of like, it's all material handlers' fault, right? And that strategy to wave people down, I always joke, take your shoe off and throw it at them because they'll probably hear that more. We came in and we implemented request management, and within a month, they had a 33% reduction in downtime waiting for parts. They didn't make any resource adjustments. They didn't change the model or change the teams. They just said it gave a tool to the teams to communicate. And their high volume areas where they've got a lot more of a wider product mix, it was a 70% reduction in that downtime, which is huge. It's basically saving them almost a shift a week. And now they've got that complete visibility into downtime events. Who do they need to train, right? What do they need to do? This has actually led them to, they're now starting to invest in an IoT project because they heard about another customer, and they really are excited to have the machines make some of these requests, right? Take some of that workload off of the operators because they're starting to get predictive and saying, hey, I know when I'm going to run low on parts. Hey, I know when I'm going to come across that. And they've taken this deployment now. It's become their default standard across all organizations. As they acquire facilities, the first thing they do is they call us and say, hey, when are we going to start deploying us into that new plant? Our next customer success story is a Japanese automotive supplier, 4 manufacturing facilities in North America, $400 million revenue, automated manufacturing. And when I say automated, Vinnie, this is your shop, man. This is who you think about. The operators are really monitoring, right, the equipment and loading and unloading parts. That's it. It's a process that's probably about 50 yards long, each line, and they have multiples of them. And the machines are they've got so much intelligence to them. Again, these are the ones that are adjusting automatically, speeding up and slowing down based on what they're seeing. And that's really as an ambient temperature, quality reaction, whatever that may be, right? Really a small team relative to this complexity of the organization for material handling. And so they wanted to optimize that process because they're having a really hard time finding additional labor. And the biggest thing is the VP of Ops, right? Every time he'd see a forklift driving what they call empty forks, which means he's got no load, he's looking for work. And he'd see him driving around like this. And the VP of Ops, every time we went on a walk with him, you'd think he was going to jump out of his skin because it's just driving him crazy. And it's not only because it's wasting time, but it's also a safety aspect of it, right? And that safety aspect is really critical because he's looking down at the machines. He's not looking where he's going, and he's got empty forks. It's one of the most dangerous times for a forklift. So we implemented Cella requests. Machines automatically create their requests through that PLC and automation. The big shift was the high-low drivers no longer just drive around looking for work. Do your task, When you're done, look at the app will tell you where to go next, and just keep following that whole process. Our expectation is a 50% reduction so far. And again, it's $400,000 a year in lost direct labor.
Yeah.
And that's just so far. They haven't even gotten into what we call like phase 2, which is like, great, now you've got the base in. Let's start adjusting resources based on the system's recommendations. Great story.
You could see between these two organizations, they were facing similar processes and problems, but they wanted to solve them differently. The Japanese automotive supplier was very much about how can we continue to lean into this automation and remove the human aspect out of it. We've optimized this entire process and these entire manufacturing operations, but there's 6 machines in a row. If the first one doesn't receive parts online, it's just a matter of time before the downtime inevitably hits each single one of these steps. So let's lean into it, and they're the ones that we partnered with to develop the machine automation, be able to drive requests that way. And then the previous customer, who's much more your standard manufacturer, makes everything you can dream of that goes inside of a car. They just need parts. They need, with the amount of real estate that they have and square footage of these operations, communication was just a lacking. They didn't necessarily want to go full bore into this machine automation until they were able to see the value of just creating that direct link of communication between the operator and the material handler, the forklift driver, and being able to measure that and then make business decisions on how we're deploying that team, how we're changing those teams, and it's becoming systemic throughout their entire organization. So when we talk to these prospects, when we talk to customers who want to expand with us, it's about really, where are they finding the struggles? Is it because they don't have the right team in place? Is it because of the way that their manufacturing operations are set up? What's a way that we can come in, find a way to look at all the different technology, all the different investments that they've made, but bring that same level of sophistication to a team that's been left behind for far too long, and we're hoping to make just their day better, which is the material handling and forklift teams.
Since most of the forklifts are doing what's called in a warehouse the picking function,
Mm-hmm.
couldn't you start to think about bringing some of the warehouse robots into play?
Yeah, and I think you'll see that. I think over time, and we actually have a customer who built their own automated ground vehicle, AGVs, to do that for some of their processes. I think it's one of the classic examples of, if you have a certain process that's pretty standardized, I think there's standardized methodologies to take care of that. I think where you're going to see, depending on your product mix and process mix, you'll see less of that because the human's more adaptable. But over time, I think there'll be this shift. I think it's just a matter of, just like automation used to be the thing of only the Honeywells of the world, and now you see it at every shop. I think you're going to see that over a longer period of time, but you'll get there.
Okay.
It's as we talk with prospects and customers, and we continue to have a laundry list of these problems, as we talked about in the earlier slides, of you have this alphabet soup of acronym organizations that are making work better, but there's still these pieces and parts that are just slightly disconnected on the shop floor that are costing them money. Driver sign in, right? When someone gets to your door, why is there still so much paper being handed back and forth? It's 2021. We can remove that. So, Vinnie, I'm sure as we continue to grow as an organization, we're excited to be able to continue to share our innovations. We have a lot more coming soon, a lot of partnerships we're excited to announce, and a lot more technology that's going to be able to connect those dots on the manufacturing operations and drive that value to organizations to be able to find where these corners that we just have been ignored for a little bit too long, where there are items like radios and paper-based processes that companies like Cella can take care of.
This is great, guys. Come back in a few months and tell us about some of the other innovations customers that are making you think about.
Absolutely. Hopefully we'll be celebrating a Bucks win. As Lions fans, we don't get too often to be able to celebrate. So we'll root for Tom Brady on this one, Vinnie, and we look forward to catching up.